Monique, so nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too.
Thank you so much for having us along here. Appropriately, we're in the sensory room here at Brentford Football Club. And I say appropriately because I know a lot of clubs have these rooms now, these facilities, but it really seems to sum up the sense of diversity and community that's at the heart of the success of this club in recent years.
I mean, the sensory room was something that we thought about really early on, before we even had the plans for the stadium. This club has inclusion running through all its strategy. And when I was here, I was fortunate enough to be leading, on that strategy, for the club at board level. And I was champion of that. And one of the things that we really talked about was the area of how neurodiversity is particularly underrepresented in football, or it's not known about because people don't ask about it. Disability is really underrepresented. I mean, we talk about many areas of inclusion that don't really get the same treatment as others. And I think you could argue that neurodiversity and disability are those two that don't get the same treatment as others do. So they wanted to put in a sensory room because then it would mean that people felt like this was an inclusive club. And I do think it gets used, quite frequently. And it needs to be a pleasant experience. Sound is a really big thing, for people who have some sort of neurodiversity. So this is why this was put in to help those people. And it really is an inclusive club, on that basis.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at their fans, and the fans will tell you that, they feel like their opinion is heard and they are asked for it and they're able to give their voice. And this was one of the things that came out of one of the focus groups when the stadium was being put together. You
can tell it wasn't an afterthought or a tick box exercise purely from the vista that you get from here. It's a spectacular view of the stadium. In terms of stakeholder orientation, and for people like myself who are interested in how that works and improves organisational performance in sport, obviously that was key when you were working with Brentford. I'm interested to know how it played out on the performance of the organisation, which has obviously been fantastic over the years.
Yeah, there's two things, and I think when people come into football, they don't really understand the landscape. They think it's all about players and the pitch and physiotherapy and coaching and all those things. And actually, the business of football is a whole other thought frame. To run a business, it's like running any corporate business, a football business. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to make money. It's got to have a good environment for people to thrive in. It has to, have jobs like every other corporation, from everything from finance to sort of HR to commercial to corporate to sponsorship, to EDI, academy excos, things like that. You've got to have, business has got to run exactly the same way for football as it has for any corporate. And part of that is inclusion. And if you get inclusion right, it's an environment where you have multiple perspectives are welcomed. You construct an environment where it feels like all voices can be heard, that there is safety for people to speak up and not fear any recrimination. If you put all of that together, that gives people, a sense of belonging. If they feel like they belong, but they can be unique at the same time, because I think that's the thing. It's not making everybody really homogenous. It's making sure that there's still uniqueness, but I can still feel like I'm part of it. And it's proven time and time again that if you do that in an organisation, you get what we call discretionary gold dust, which is people give you more than what you pay them for. Because if they feel valued and they have an opportunity to use their value, they will give you more than that is expected of them. Well, we in academic thinking and leadership, we call that transformational leadership, not transactional leadership. It's not like, here's the carrot and the stick. And what inclusion has proved is if you give people the environment to thrive, and you take away all the barriers to them performing, they'll give more than you expect of them. And what inclusion does is it does that. But it works on a multiple approach. It's how do you use diversity? Because it's no good saying we have a diverse organisation. I think that's actually a big mistake, and it actually has proven time and time again. And there are many stats that it rebounds because it becomes tokenistic. It's what you do with diversity when you bring it into the organisation. How do you look after your people with all of the different things they bring, the cognitive diversity, the diversity of ethnicity or any protected characteristics, but make them feel like they really are onboarded into the organisation. And if you do that without onboarding, it rebounds and it's a real problem. So there's that. It's also, what's the leader's footprint in a business? So when you're a leader in an organisation, you do have a responsibility and accountability to provide a safe haven for your people. And you can't be friends with everybody and you can't know every single thing about people, but you can ask them about themselves. You can understand what makes somebody tick. And if you ask them what makes them tick, and they tell you they've got issues outside of work, which sometimes it's hard to leave on the doorstep when you come into an office, but you can have that happen side by side with doing your work. Often you perform really well because somebody understands you and is sympathetic for you and has empathy for you. So I think also leaders need to be humble. And I think in any organisation, there's a fine line between humility and arrogance. And if a leader says, I want feedback, I want to be able to give you feedback so we can all be better at what we do. But if a leader says, I want feedback, they need to be open to it if it's given to them. So I think the leader's footprint is really, really important. But also how much communication is there? I mean, do you feel any sense of discrimination or harassment or bullying? Do you feel that if there is a problem, should there be a problem, you've got somewhere you can go to report it? There's so much you need to take into consideration. But there are some stats, and some recent stats are that leaders who create more inclusive environments where they particularly intentionally focus on belonging create 33% more happy and satisfied people. So that's a third of your workforce are more happy. Attrition is less by 22% apparently, which is that if you are working like this, it means you have less people leave an organisation. And then when people go out and they advocate to their friends, I mean, I don't know if you've seen these surveys that doctors send around, they call it the friends and family test. But organisations that are really inclusive, they will go out and they will tell everybody they know. They'll go, I work for this amazing organisation. These are the sort of things we do. We have a sensory room, or bring in fans, or we do ethnicity forums, or they'll tell people, and the word gets around outside of the ecosystem that you're in. So it's a hell of a responsibility being a leader in an organisation. But I think sport has a very unique ability to impact society. And if it uses inclusion in a really positive way, it probably does more than maybe just a normal corporation would, if that makes sense. Because you can see it, you can feel it, you can be part of it. So.
Yeah, I mean, inherently it has the ability to create that sense of belonging that you touched on there, doesn't it? And identity, culturally and socially, and all of the things that we associate with. As sports fans ourselves, we can all identify with that. In your experience, and obviously outside of the executive roles that I touched on in my introduction that you've done within football and are doing within football, you work a lot with business leaders. When you touch on this stuff and when you introduce this stuff, particularly around inclusion to perhaps leaders or boards that are not inclusive or open, how does that land, and how do you go about changing opinions, even though the business case is increasingly strong for it?
Well, first of all, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. Often you have to present the business case. So working with boards and working with leaders is a little bit different, because the operational leaders of an organisation may have a place on the board, but they're not the people that make the shareholder decisions about the board, about the business. So for a board to be more inclusive, it has to have the imperative and the wish to do so. It has to have the desire to say, what's the best we can be? What's the vision for this organisation? And you wouldn't be talking about tick boxes or quotas or anything like that. And when I've worked with boards, the way that they've done it, the good boards have actually, you've presented a business case to them. That might be a paper you have to write. You have to do a board skills evaluation. You have to talk about what skills are needed on the board. And then you have to say, well, do I have diversity on every level? Do I have young and old? Do I have social background. Just because I might not have been educated or someone hasn't been educated in a particular way doesn't mean they don't have skills to actually add to that board. Do you have the right gender balance? Do you have the right diversity balance? Do you have the right cognitive thinking balance? Has somebody worked globally or not globally? So if we treat diversity as simply, we reduce it to being things like colour and gender, and disability and protective characteristics, we're forgetting that diversity is bigger than that. However, the major problem with boards is that many of them in football aren't diverse, but there is more diversity outside in the corporate ecosystem. I can give you a key stat on this. There is a particular review that is done every few years. I think it's called the Hampton Alexander Review, and they had a target that they would be 40% of people on boards would be women, and I hope to get to that for the FTSE 350 by 2025. They've already achieved that. So if you think of the FTSE 350, out of that 40% of women, 40% of boards are women, and it's like 3 to 5% in sport. Wow. So now, because of environmental, social and governance, the shareholders are demanding that boards are more structurally even. They think that boards that have diversity make better decisions. It reduces bias. So the business case for it is much easier to bring about. And if you see it at board level, often it trickles down to the rest of the organisation. And this very often used phrase, you've got to see it to be it, I actually think is true. Because if you look up, and the more you go up, it's middle class and it's white, in an organisation. What chance is there for you if you haven't had the education, you haven't been to a university, you haven't been to Oxbridge, you haven't done those things? Where do you feel like your route is to the top?
And who's going to give you that opportunity?
And who's going to give you that opportunity? Who opens those doors for you? When you don't, the doors aren't opened. So I think that we're not there in sport. We're getting there, but there are still some massive disparities between the two. So it wouldn't be unusual for me now to walk into an organisation and see a person on a senior leadership greeting me who's a woman. If I go into a football club, it's still yet unusual to see a senior leadership person being a woman. Yeah. And that's a real shame, because they've got the business skills inside football just like they've got the business skills outside of football. Yeah. So we're still in challenging times around. It's getting better, but we're still challenged.
Yeah, so how do you leverage the business case in sport then? Given, I would say that this is a great example here, what you and your colleagues managed to achieve here at Brentford, because you can see the results on the pitch, a new stadium, commercially. Everything is performing really strongly because of that core idea around inclusion. Give us some kind of feel for what that journey was like from the inside specifically, and if we're going to present this as a business case for
well, I think we did that. And I think we did that, and it wasn't without its challenges. But I think that the world was at a turning point after the sad and untimely loss of George Floyd in America, and which started off the Black Lives Matter thinking and group. Unfortunately, it got a little bit, how can I say, conflated with the Black Lives Matter political group, which wasn't actually right. What we were trying to say was, and we've got to go back 3 years here, which was we were in a very undiverse world. We had diversity on the pitch, but we didn't really have diversity in clubs. And what happened was that all of a sudden people wanted to tip the scales a bit more. And what it started is this all-inclusion movement, which is fine, but when you've got one proportion of society that's been disadvantaged really seriously for thousands and thousands of years, you have to find a way to intentionally put focus on bringing that back in, which is where the kneeling came from, and the talking about race and working groups and etc. So I think at that point we were all at this sort of juxtaposition. We all had to make a change. Doing nothing was not an option. We had to do something. And I remember our director of football, Phil Giles, who I think is incredibly enlightened around diversity. He picked up the phone to me after a board meeting. He said, "What do we need to do? How can we show up? What do we need to do?" He said, "We've got this fantastic diversity on the pitch. We know that those players were driven by diverse data and trying to reduce bias. How can we take that and put it into sort of the business side, to make us better? What do we need to do?" And we changed our governance principles. We did a board skills evaluation. We did a proper board evaluation, laying down feedback around how we are, what we needed to do, how we needed to be as a board. And as a result of that, we said, these are the skills that are missing from our board. Now, rather than just tapping on someone's shoulder and going, "You want a board position? Come along and join Brentford." We didn't do that. So we advertised. And how we advertised was, we said, we are going to recruit and we're going to have what we call a weighted system. So we took the skills we need, we looked the weight of the importance of those particular skills. And what we did was we went to Sky Sports News and we said to them, we are one of the most diverse boroughs in the whole of the country. I think the ONS statistics in 2019 were something like 49% of diversity. I think it's now 54. I think it's changed. So 5% over 3 years is a lot if you consider how many thousands of people that is. And we said, well, look, if you look around the stadium, you see the odd face that's not white, but frankly, we're talking under 10%, and maybe even less than that. How do we reflect the society and the culture and the community that we're in, and sort of make it look like that our Brentford represents the society and the community that we live in? And that's exactly what we did. So we did that, and we're nearly into 3 figures of people that applied for the job. But what it was an incredibly diverse pool of people. And our shortlist was probably 80% diversity. We had these 2 fantastic people in the final round, and we employed them both, Preeti Shetty and Deji Davis. And in one fell swoop, we changed our board to become the most diverse board in the football leagues. And then we said, recruitment, how do we recruit into the organisation? So we set up a diverse recruitment protocol, which became part of our handbook, on and off the pitch, so it transferred across. We changed our policies. We put intentional focus on diverse hiring and inclusive hiring, where we made sure that every panel had some diversity represented on it, so that when people came in, they were able to look and see people like themselves. We made sure that we debiased the recruitment process, so rather than it just being about a CV and education, we asked competency-based questions beforehand, so life skills would have an influence on that. And just bit by bit, we just changed the landscape. So if you look now and you look at the staff now, and you look at the workforce now, it is a multicultural workforce, and it completely represents our community, and it completely represents society at large. And I'm not going to say that Brentford's completely succeeded, because your job is never done. No. It's never done. But if you look at it now compared to what it looked like in 2020, it's changed. And I think there are other boards and clubs doing well, but I think the one thing we have to cut people slack in is in their demographics. Right? If you look at Brighton's demographics, for instance, it's a very white demographic. It's a high gay community, high Jewish community. Where you're going to get your growth from? You're not going to get more necessarily black fans in the stadium or Asians in the stadium. But if you go into Blackburn, or you go to Bradford, or you go to Arsenal, or you go to Tottenham, I could go on ad infinitum. It is easy to increase those numbers if you're intentional about it. So it's hard to do it. I was lucky because I think I had an enlightened board that I worked with. But when I first started, I was amongst a board of 7 men, 8 men, 7 of them were all Brentford supporters. That's not diversity either. Because how do you debias your processes when everybody looks at Brentford? So I think the rule is that diversity comes from a lot of places, but you have to say, this is what we're going to do, and you have to check yourself if you don't do it. And we've challenged football codes, the FA Football Code. We said that we didn't think it represented women as well. We didn't think it represented disability as well. So I think you have to take a stand. and I think a couple of boards are now starting to follow suit. But on the boardrooms I go into, I'm often still the only woman. Our board directors that go in are still the only people of colour. So we're not there. Not even yet. We're not there. We're not. I can't even say yet, because yet suggests that we've made progress. No progress. I reckon in leadership we're going to find this progress. I reckon in staffing we're going to find this progress. But it is demographic, absolutely influenced. So if you're in an area where your core demographic is white, it's got hard to change it. Like Middlesbrough, for instance, hard to change it.
Yeah, but then they have other ways of engaging with the community in Middlesbrough that's right. Not that they can have a social impact there by engaging with the demands of that particular area.
And you'll do that through your foundation or your community sports trust. By definition, they're EDI organisations, because they work in the heart of communities, maybe dealing with mental health, well-being, gangs, rape, crime, knife, all of those things. And those foundations are, as I said, by definition, they are diverse. They're focusing on diverse matters. But the staffing often of those organisations, it does not match the diversity that it's trying to affect. So there's often a disconnect between the community that I find myself supporting, if you're an organisation, and who am I as an individual. And you're better if you're supporting communities when you have that diversity yourself, because you have empathy. Yeah. You're standing in the shoes of people that you're trying to, to influence. Otherwise, you're only guessing on what matters to them. You sort of have to be of it in order to somehow make a distant step, in order to. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not. I'm not trying to be difficult because I know that Brentford sits in one of the most diverse boroughs, and it's had to work itself to think about diversity from a staffing angle, and is doing that brilliantly. But it's hard. Yeah. It's hard. You work with what you've got. And if you can inch it up a little bit, you start to just represent more society. All I'm saying is that football on the pitch is very diverse, and it's just the business ecosystem and the fan ecosystem doesn't always match that.
You mentioned Phil Giles there before,
yeah,
and how that all of this kind of stemmed from a conversation with him. And I know that there was an element of happenstance to Phil becoming involved in football in the first place, and he came across with a lot of commercial acumen. How much kind of credit do you give to him and his particular characteristics, or what are those characteristics actually that made him available and made him pick up the phone and ask you that question?
Well, I think it wasn't only him. I think there were other people. Niti Raj, who's our legal counsel, but is also, executive sponsor and owner of safeguarding and HR and EDI within the organisation. And Cliff Crown is the chair. He had to go on a journey as well, in order to do these things. But I think Phil is available. He's a quiet man. He's unbelievably bright man, smart, very, very smart. But for him, this just made business sense. And, he's working with footballers all of the time. He's also working with numbers all of the time. So he knows that good data drives better thinking, better decision making. You definitely get better decision making if you are more diverse cognitively, as well as characteristically. Put those two together, surely together, you're going to get a better class of staff and conversation and education. But I wouldn't just say it was. I think Phil's surrounded by a really good team of people. I mean, I think there's a lot of people here where they've gone on the journey to understand. I think I think you'll find that John Varney, the CEO, has gone on that journey as well. I think Cliff's really gone on that journey, and I think he's a brilliant advocate now. They've had to really get behind it and understand why it makes a difference. I think they're now seeing the benefit of why it makes a difference. Who knows if 4 or 5 years ago they saw that? I'm going to say not. But I'm not going to say that was out of ignorance. I'm going to say that was out of probably naivety, which is they didn't know that having diversity and inclusion in an organisation would have the super impact that it does. And I think once they got that, it's like turning on a tap and it doesn't turn off, because you can see the effect, the trickle effect, that it gives you. So I'm not sure. I think there are super people in other organisations who are good at this. I think Paul Barber, the CEO of Brighton, I would name check, them. I think they're very good. I think Alan at Burnley, very enlightened, taking on Vincent Kompany, as a manager. I think Man City, pretty understanding of diversity. They're getting better at it as well, as a really well-run organisation. There are some other organisations, but it's of the few, not of the many.
Well, when you perhaps take Man City out of it, but Brighton and Burnley, certainly organisations that are performing beyond their means, right? So the business case is there. You used the word available, and when you and I had a conversation about doing this podcast together, we touched on this a little bit. Can you explain a bit more what you mean about being available emotionally as well as literally?
Yeah. Well, I think people talk a lot about emotional intelligence, don't they? Which
I do.
Yeah, and emotional intelligence is a really interesting thing, because it's all about self-awareness, self-management, self-regulation around emotions, and recognising others and being able to respond to that. Yeah. So very, very quickly, I'll say that you can be very good at regulating your own emotions, but not good at communicating them. You can be brilliant for other people, but really rubbish with your own. I've seen this. I've seen people who are the best mentors and the best coaches, and they listen, and then at home their life's falling apart. It seems to be not everybody has it ticked in every area of their life. So emotional intelligence really starts to really increase in your late 20s, right? So before that, you're just forming some of your life experience. So let's say your IQ, your formal qualification, finishes when you're in your early 20s as such. Doesn't matter whether you do a master's or a PhD, but what I go, your schooling. You're only going to start building your life experiences when you're starting to be around people and not a book, or not an online. And that develops emotional intelligence, so that you're triggered by things that happen to you. Whereas emotional availability is slightly different. It's about spotting that people need you, which I think is very different than emotional intelligence, because I can have high emotional intelligence, but somebody might walk past me who is in a really dark place, and I don't really know that. I might ask a question and find that out. But I think when you're emotionally available to people, your radar is really heightened. Like, you can walk in a room and you can just sense something's not well. Maybe somebody's not performing as well. Maybe they're not giving what they gave. Maybe they're not contributing quite in the same way. Maybe they're starting to do behaviours that are out of character. And when you're more emotionally available, it means that you can pick up on some of those cues and those sensors and pull that person in and be there for them. It doesn't necessarily drain you, so it's not like sympathy. It's more about recognising that other people need you, and that for a time, briefly or for a long period of time, you have to step out of yourself in order to do that. It's not the same as emotional intelligence, because that can be present in you all the time and not really change, greatly. And I think a leader today needs to be really agile. They need to be really adaptive and flexible, fleet of foot. And young people are tested right now. They're tested on social media with what we call comparanoia. They're comparing themselves all the time. There's a lot of imposter syndrome out there, and money's not as it was, jobs aren't as it was. We're in a really sort of hardcore struggle environment right now, and this fleet of foot, this agility of leaders needs to be stronger than it ever was. I'm not saying be a carer, and I'm not saying be a parent, but you need to be able to just tune in to what's going on around you, because very often people come into an office and that's the only place they can be themselves. They come into a job and that's the only place they can be themselves, and that's a bit of a responsibility.
Yeah, that's quite heavy.
It's heavy. It's heavy. So, but also with that comes the fun and of the camaraderie of being with people, and back to where we started around belonging, the sort of things. But I think availability is quite a new skill. We've only talked about it for the last year to 2 years. It's quite like inclusion's really only been talked about for the last 7 years. So we talk about it now like it's an ice cream, but actually nobody talked about inclusion till the mid-teens. So
it's exciting though. It's
yeah.
Isn't it? Because there's so much potential there. I know there's a lot of theory out there already about how a leader can improve their emotional intelligence, but how do they improve their emotional availability?
Well, first of all, they have to want it, and that all depends on them. Because if you think about, you might have goals as a leader. You know, you're responsible upwards to the person that says to you, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to hit your goal, you've got to make sure that we're financially viable, you've got to make sure that we get this over the line, we've got shareholders' interest in whatever. All of that dilutes your ability to be available because you're thinking about your own survival. So leaders, I think, increase their availability by wanting it, by opening their eyes and seeing, by recognising. We did a really good programme on the board here, the Brentford board, about being a forerunner, mental health forerunner and advocate, recognising signs and symptoms. You know, what do we need to look for in the workplace that might show that there are people who've got signs of diminished well-being, increased mental health issues. Everyone's got mental health. It's just some of it's really good and some of it's not so good. So I think you increase your availability by recognising those things. I think just by chatting like you and I do, by going, how are you doing? What what's going on? And I think a leader needs a certain amount of vulnerability, and I think most people would probably stick pins in my eyes if they heard me saying that. But I think you need to be vulnerable, and I don't mean that means shedding your emotion all over the place. I think it means saying, I got it wrong. You know, I'm not fallible. You know, I make a mistake. I maybe said the wrong thing there. Sometimes I don't give you the time I need to give you. You know, mea culpa. But it's not trying to be a superhero. A superpower is not trying to be a superhero. A superpower is going, you know, I'm humble and I can make a mistake and I fail and I can be vulnerable and I can be exposed and I'm still safe in this environment. And that's quite a new paradigm of leadership. It's not, again, it's developing, you know, right now, I think. So this all come along with this new terminology that happened about 2 years ago called psychological safety. So it's building trust. And it's the whole thing about, you know, trust is two-way. I give it and I earn it. And I earn it when people feel like I've got their back. So if I come to you and I've got a harsh problem, but you leave me on my own to deal with it, that's not being emotionally available, and it's certainly not being emotionally intelligent. So,
a bit more discretionary gold dust there,
yeah,
as well.
Yeah, you like that?
That's a good, I liked it. Well, I like the fact that it can be a two-way thing.
It can be a two-way thing, exactly.
Well. Yeah. Tell us a bit more about your role now, then, Monique, because you stepped back from the board here at Brentford.
I did
earlier this year.
Yeah.
To presumably work on other things, and
yes.
I guess, did you feel like your work here was done, or?
Yeah, I mean, I was coming to the end of my term this year in any case. We had a rotation, and so whoever's the sort of chair of the EDI and Wellbeing Committee, which I was, we have a 2-year rotation, and the next person was coming on board with that earlier this next year. So I thought, rather than sort of stepping down in the middle of a season, but also I wanted to move on to different projects. My work is really increasing with women in football. I'm joining a new board in October around inclusive hiring, and I'm really passionate about that. And they're setting up a new consultancy, and they've formed an advisory board to sort of help them put that project together and that concept together and really advocate for it out with people in sport generally, not just in football. That could be netball, hockey, etc. I'm also working with a startup around micro learning for academy players, so they can get micro learning pushed to their phone, you know, rather than have to go on a laptop.
What's micro learning?
Micro learning is small bites of learning, flash learning for people, 15-20 minutes a day, on things that really matter to academy players. The stats are really appalling. 80% of academy players, when they leave an academy and they haven't made it into elite football, feel like they haven't got the skills to make it out in the world. Because at the time they were in the academy, they missed some of their formative education, they did not go to university, they haven't been in a job, they don't know how to be, they've probably lost skills around financial literacy and management, a bit of self-branding, a bit of presenting communication, a bit of understanding law and how it works when you're with an agent or somebody that manages you, on a daily basis, and even things like inclusion, about, how to be in a cultural world. So the startup I'm working with has developed a number of modules which can be bespoke for a football academy globally, and the academy player can get access to this on a flash basis, 15-20 minutes a day, which is, we know how young people like to learn. It's very quick, it's not big, long in the training room, on online, etc. But also it's an opportunity to chat on this app, where they can chat with mentors who might actually help them make the right decisions, and they can get answers in real time on that. So we're in the process of prototyping it and developing it, and we're going into the live stage really soon. But I'm passionate about education, so for me this was a no-brainer. And also it's a real give back to society, because if you think about it, the mental health issues that come with people that are burnt out, after they leave academies and then they go into football, or they start football, they get a long-term injury and they leave. They don't know who else they can be, what else they can be. But here, they've developed some life skills which actually help them make it in the outside world and advocate for themselves rather than having other people advocate for them. So as far as we know, there's nobody else doing it. So it's at the moment it's being prototyped by Portuguese Football Club. They're testing it for us to a good response at the moment, and we're hoping for it to go global very soon.
Fantastic! I can't wait to hear more about that when it launches. And clearly for you, I mean, your purpose, and perhaps this was a question for the start of the conversation rather than towards the end, but I can see that you're driven by making an impact in society. Are you doing that through sport because you see it as a vehicle to achieve that goal, or is there something inherently to do with sport that's within you?
Well, I think I've always liked sport. I mean, I'm a Tottenham supporter. Don't say that out loud. I'm a Brentford supporter, of course, but I started out as a Tottenham supporter, so I always used to go to with my dad when I was a kid. So I've always loved football, loved team sports. I played table tennis, I played netball, so I was really interested in that. And I'm in a football family. My husband's and daughter are Watford season ticket holders. Well, you may ask why, but they are, and they love it. My son's a Tottenham supporter, so we're all in this football ecosystem that we love. And I do think sport has a very fantastic opportunity and unique ability to drive societal change. I mean, you see when your team lose at the weekend, people can. My uncle was a long-suffering Arsenal supporter. And if they lost, he didn't talk for the whole weekend. And his wife would go, "He's not saying anything." My aunt would say, "He's not saying anything," and because it affects you that much.
Yeah, controls your emotions.
And also, you when social media abuse was really going up on social media, and it's still there, but it's a little bit more controlled at the moment. You would find that discrimination and abuse would go up on social media when a team had lost. It's directly relevant. So there's that side of it. But in society, I've always been driven by, driving gender equity, gender equality. And I think probably that came about because, my father wasn't, a particularly gender equitable person. And so that maybe gave me my impetus to sort of go out there and help others. I've been quite successful, so as a result of my success, I've had the ability to advocate for other women, and do that. For me, what's the point of working if you can't drive change? And even if you're only going to be at a job for 9 to 5, and you just want to just go home, which is fantastic, at the end of the day, while you're there, do something that makes a difference. And for me, it's always been about making a difference. But I'm learning as I've got older, making a difference doesn't have to come at a personal cost, because I think it used to wear me out. And I think when you're driving something, you often get caught up in your own identity with it. So you have to somehow step away and go, I want to make a difference to people, but if I don't save myself, I can't save anyone. So that's something that I've been working on in the last sort of couple of years, which is I've got this big vision, but break it down bit by bit, a little bit at a time, and then pick off the things that I think really can do the right stuff. Because it's not about me, it's about the legacy that something leaves. Yeah. So I feel leaving Brentford, I've left a really good legacy. I do feel 100% that if I look around and I see Be Together, and I see, you know, one club for all, and all the things that everyone's saying, I go, I developed that policy. I came up with that slogan with our fan and community relations to, you know, I feel like I've left a legacy, and I feel proud of that. And that's what it should be. You do something, you leave a legacy, you move on, you go to the next thing. It's never about you. You're just protecting it for the next generation. And that's what I'm passionate about.
That's wonderful, and it's been such a pleasure to speak to you, Monique, but especially sat amidst this legacy. And I'm sure there'll be many more before you're done.
Who knows? My work is not done. I think I'll be. Perhaps we'll have another podcast in 5 years' time just to see what progress has been made.
Let's do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.